School of Management Studies, IGNOU presents an audiobook on the course MMPC-001 Management Functions and Organizational Processes for MBA program. Presenting Block 3 Managerial Processes Part 2 Unit-9 Decision Making Part 1.
After completing this unit, you should be able to understand the 3 steps of the process through which you make any decision. Classify the kinds of decisions you make. Identify the varying degrees of knowledge under which you make decisions. Recognize the assumptions of different models which either describe how decisions are made or prescribe how decisions should be made. Understand the necessity of identifying and evaluating a reasonable number of possible alternative courses of action for accomplishing organizational objectives. Display familiarity with various means for generating alternative courses of action. Decide to what extent participation of others is desirable, when and how group discussion strategies should be used, and diagnose roadblocks to effective decision making and develop some strategies to overcome them. Introduction. You will possibly agree that decision making is a part of everyday life. The fact that you have taken up a course in management or the fact that you are studying this unit are both products of your decision to do them against other alternatives which were available to you. Whether you are at a board meeting or in the playground, you are almost constantly making decisions, sometimes working on several at the same time. These may be major or minor, but some of these might have proved to be effective decisions, viz., appropriate, timely, and acceptable. Some of your decisions might have been wrong, but you knew that there was something worse than a few wrong decisions, and that was indecision. Making decisions has been identified as one of the primary responsibilities of any manager. Decisions may involve allocating resources, appointing people, investing capital, or introducing new products. If resources like men, money, machines, materials, time and space were abundant, clearly any planning would be unnecessary. But typically, resources are scarce, and so there is a need for planning. Decision making is at the core of all planned activities. We cannot afford to waste scarce resources by making too many wrong decisions or by remaining indecisive for too long a time. In this unit, various techniques involved in decision making, for example, brainstorming, semantics, and nominal grouping are described and discussed. Then the unit describes various methods for identification, selection of various alternatives, and implementation of decisions made. Differences and similarities between individual versus group decision making are then explained, including the phenomenon of groupthink. Various barriers to effective decision making are also enumerated. Three phases in decision making process. You can define decision making as the process of choosing between alternatives to achieve a goal. But if you closely look into the process of selecting among available alternatives, you will be able to identify 3 relatively distinct stages. Put into a time frame and you will find: number 1, the past, in which problems developed, information accumulated, and the need for a decision was perceived. Number 2, the present, in which alternatives are found and the choice is made. And number 3, the future, in which decisions will be carried out and evaluated. Herbert Simon The well-known Nobel laureate decision theorist described the activities associated with major stages in a certain way. Number 1. Intelligence activity. Borrowing from the military meaning of intelligence, Simon describes this initial phase as an attempt to recognize and understand the nature of the problem as well as search for the possible causes. Number 2. Design activity. During the second phase, alternative courses of action are developed and analyzed in the light of known constraints. And number 3. Choice activity. The actual choice among available and assessed alternatives is made at this stage. If you have followed the nature of activities of these 3 phases, you should be able to see why the quality of any decision is largely influenced by the thoroughness of the intelligence and design phases. Henry Mintzberg and some of his colleagues in 1999 have traced the phases of some decisions actually taken in organization. They have also come up with a 3-phase model. Number 1. The identification phase, during which recognition of a problem or opportunity arises and a diagnosis is made. It was found that severe immediate problems did not have a very systematic, extensive diagnosis, but that milder problems did have. Number 2. The development phase, during which there may be a search for existing standard procedures, ready-made solutions, or the design of a new tailor-made solution. It was found that the design process was a grouping, trial and error process in which the decision makers had only a vague idea of the ideal situation. And number 3, the selection phase, during which the choice of a solution is made. There are 3 ways of making this selection: by the judgment of the decision maker, on the basis of experience or intuition rather than logical analysis, by analysis of the alternatives on a logical systematic basis, and by bargaining when the selection involves a group of decision makers. Once the decision is formally accepted, an authorization is made. Note that the decision making is a dynamic process and there are many feedback loops in each of these phases. These feedback loops can be caused by the problems of timing, politics, disagreement among decision makers, inability to identify an appropriate alternative or to implement the solution, or the sudden appearance of a new alternative, etc. So, though on the surface any decision making appears to be a fairly simple 3-stage process, it could actually be a highly complex dynamic process. Types of managerial decisions. There are many types of decisions which you would be required to make as a manager. 3 most widely recognized classifications are: Number 1. Personal and organizational decisions. Number 2. Basic and routine decisions. And number 3. Programmed and non-programmed decisions. The first classification of personal and organizational decisions was suggested by Chester Bernard nearly 50 years ago in his classic book, The Functions of the Executive. In his opinion, the basic difference between 2 decisions is that personal decisions cannot ordinarily be delegated to others, whereas organizational decisions can often, if not always, be delegated. Thus, the manager makes organizational decisions that attempt to achieve organizational goals and personal decisions that attempt to achieve personal goals. Note that personal decisions can affect the organization, as in the case of a senior manager deciding to resign. However, if you analyze a decision, you may find that the distinctions between personal and organizational decisions are a matter of degrees. You are to some extent personally involved in any organizational decision that you make, and you need to resolve the conflicts that might arise between organizational and personal goals. Another common way of classifying types of decisions is according to whether they are basic or routine. Basic decisions are those which are unique, one-time decisions involving long-range commitment of relative performance, of relative permanence or duration, or those involving large investments. Examples of basic decisions in a business firm include plant location, organization structure, wage negotiations, product line, etc. In other words, most top management policy decisions can be considered as basic decisions. Routine decisions are at the opposite extreme from basic decisions. They are the everyday, highly repetitive management decisions which by themselves have little impact on the overall organization. However, taken together, routine decisions play a tremendously important role in the success of an organization. Examples of routine decision are an accountant's decision on a new entry, a production supervisor's decision to appoint a new worker, and a salesperson's decisions on what territory to cover. Obviously, a very large proportion, that is, most experts estimate about 90% of the decisions made in an organization are of the routine variety. However, the exact proportion of basic to routine types depends on the level of the organization in which the decisions are made. For example, a first-line supervisor makes practically all the routine decisions, whereas the chairperson of the board makes very few routine decisions but many basic decisions. Simon in 1999 distinguishes between programmed, that is, routine or repetitive decisions, and non-programmed, that is, unique or one-shot decisions. While programmed decisions are typically handled through structured or bureaucratic techniques, that is, standard operating procedures, non-programmed decisions must be made by managers using available information and their own judgment. As is often the case with managers, however, decisions are made under the pressure of time. An important principle of organization design that relates to managerial decision-making is Gresham's law of planning. This law states that there is a general tendency for programmed activities to overshadow non-programmed activities. Hence, if you have a series of decisions to make, those that are more routine and repetitive will tend to be made before the ones that are unique and require considerable thought. This happens presumably because you attempt to clear your desk so that you can get down to the really serious decisions. However, the desk very often never get cleared. After going through the three types of classification of managerial decisions, you could see that there is no single and satisfactory way of classifying decision situations. Moreover, the foregoing classifications have ignored two important problem-related dimensions. Number one, how complex is the problem in terms of number of factors associated with it? And number two, how much certainty can be placed with the outcome of a decision? Based on these two dimensions, four kinds of decisions modes can be identified: mechanistic, analytical, judgmental, and adaptive. Number 1. Mechanistic decisions. A mechanistic decision is the one that is routine and repetitive in nature. It usually occurs in a situation involving a limited number of decision variables where the outcomes of each alternative are known. For example, the manager of a bicycle shop may know from experience when and how many bicycles are to be ordered, or the decision may have been reached already, so the delivery is made routinely. Most mechanistic decision problems are solved by habitual responses, standard operating procedures, or clerical routines. In order to further simplify these mechanistic decisions, managers often develop charts, lists, matrices, decision trees, etc. Number 2. Analytical decisions. An analytical decision involves a problem with a large number of decision variables where the outcomes of each decision alternative can be computed. Many complex production and engineering problems are like this. They may be complex, but solutions can be found. Management science and operations research provide a variety of computational techniques that can be used to find optimal solutions. These techniques include linear programming, network analysis, inventory reorder model, queuing theory, statistical analysis, and so forth. Number 3. Judgmental decisions. A judgmental decision involves a problem with a limited number of decision variables, but the outcomes of decision alternatives are unknown. Many marketing, investment, and resource allocation problems come under this category. For example, the marketing manager may have several alternative ways of promoting a product, but he or she may not be sure of their outcomes. Good judgment is needed to increase the possibility of desired outcomes and minimize the possibility of undesired outcomes. Number 4. Adaptive decisions. An adaptive decision involves a problem with a large number of decision variables where outcomes are not predictable. Because of the complexity and uncertainty of such problems, decision makers are not able to agree on their nature or on decision strategies. Such ill-structured problems usually require the contributions of many people with diverse technical backgrounds. In such a case, decision and implementation strategies have to be frequently modified to accommodate new developments in technology and the environment. Decision making under different states of nature. In the previous topic on types of decisions, you have seen that a decision maker may not have complete knowledge about decision alternatives, that is, high problem complexity, or about the outcome of a chosen alternative, that is, high outcome uncertainty. These conditions of knowledge are often referred to as states of nature and have been labeled as decision under certainty, decisions under risk, and decisions under uncertainty. Decision making under certainty. A decision is made under conditions of certainty when a manager knows the precise outcome associated with each possible alternative or course of action. In such situations, there is perfect knowledge about alternatives and their consequences. Exact results are known in advance with complete 100% certainty. The probability of specific outcomes is assumed to be equal to 1. A manager is simply faced with identifying the consequences of available alternatives and selecting the outcome with the highest benefit or payoff. As you can probably imagine, managers rarely operate under conditions of certainty. The future is only barely known. Indeed, it is difficult to think of examples of all but the most trivial business decisions that are made under such conditions. One frequent illustration that is often cited as a decision under at least certainty is the purchase of government bonds or certificates of deposits. For example, as per the assurance provided by Government of India, Rupees 1,000 invested in a 9-year National Savings Certificate will bring a fixed sum of Rupees 2,015 after 6 complete years of investment. It should still be realized, however, that the government defaulting on its obligations is an unlikely probability, but the possibility still exists. This reinforces the point that very few decisions' outcome can be considered a sure thing. Decision making under risk. A decision is made under conditions of risk when a single action may result in more than one potential outcome, but the relative probability of each outcome is known. Decisions under conditions of risk are perhaps the most common. In such situations, alternatives are recognized, but their resulting consequences are probabilistic and doubtful. As an illustration, if you bet a number 9 for a single roll of dice, you have a 1 by 9 probability of winning in that there is only one chance in 6 of rolling a 9. While the alternatives are clear, the consequence is probabilistic and doubtful. Thus, a condition of risk may be said to exist. In practice, managers assess the likelihood of various outcomes occurring based on past experience, research, and other information. A quality control inspector, for example, might determine the probability of number of rejects per production run. Likewise, a safety engineer might determine the probability of number of accidents occurring, or a personnel manager might determine the probability of a certain turnover or absenteeism rate. Decision making under uncertainty. A decision is made under conditions of uncertainty when a single action may result in more than one potential outcome, but the relative probability of each outcome is unknown. Decisions under conditions of uncertainty are unquestionably the most difficult. In such situations, a manager has no knowledge whatsoever on which to estimate the likely occurrence of various alternatives. Decisions under uncertainty generally occur in cases where no historical data are available from which to infer probabilities, or instances which are so novel and complex that it is impossible to make comparative judgments. Examples of decisions under complete uncertainty are as difficult to cite as examples of decisions under absolute certainty. Given even limited experience and the ability to generalize from past situations, most managers should be able to make at least some estimate of the probability of occurrence of various outcomes. Nevertheless, there are undoubtedly times when managers feel they are dealing with complete uncertainty. Selection of a new advertising program from among several alternatives might be one such example. The number of factors to be considered and the large number of uncontrollable variables vital to the success of such a venture can be mind-boggling. On a personal level, the selection of a job from among alternatives is a career decision that incorporates a great deal of uncertainty. The number of factors to be weighed and evaluated, often without comparable standards, can be overwhelming. Models of decision-making process. By now, you have learned what the different phases of a decision-making process are, what types of decisions you are likely to make in an organization, and under what states of nature these decisions are made. Now, you are going to examine 3 suggested models of the decision-making process, which will help you to understand how decisions are made and should be made. These 3 models are: number 1, the chronologic model or the economic man; number 2, the bounded rationality model or the administrative man; and number 3, the implicit favorite model or the game man. You will notice that each model differs on the assumptions it makes about the person or persons making the decisions. Chronologic model or economic man model. The chronologic model represents the earliest attempt to model decision process. Briefly, this model rests on 2 assumptions. Number 1, it assumes that people are economically rational, and number 2, that people attempts to maximize outcomes in an orderly and sequential process. Economic rationality, a basic concept in many models of decision making, exists when people attempt to maximize objectively measured advantage, such as money or units of goods produced. That is, it is assumed that people will select the decision or course of action that has the greatest advantage or payoff from among the many alternatives. It is also assumed that they go about this search in a planned, orderly, and logical fashion. A basic chronologic decision model suggests certain steps in the decision process. They are: number 1, discover the symptoms of the problem or difficulty. Number 2, determine the goals to be achieved or define the problems to be solved. Number 3, develop a criterion against which alternative solutions can be evaluated. Number 4, identify all alternative courses of actions. Number 5, consider the consequences of each alternative as well as the likelihood of occurrence of each. Number 6, select best alternative. Number 7, act or implement decision. Number 8, Choose the best alternative by comparing the consequences of each alternative with the decision criterion. And number 9, act or implement the decision. The economic man model represents a useful prescription of how decisions should be made, but it does not adequately portray how decisions are actually made. If you consider this prescriptive model, you shall be able to recognize some of the assumptions it makes about the capabilities of human beings. Firstly, people have the capability to gather all necessary information for a decision, that is, people can have complete information. Secondly, people can mentally store this information in some stable form, that is, they can accurately recall any information anytime they like. Thirdly, people can manipulate all this information in a series of complex calculations designed to provide expected values. And fourthly, people can rank the consequences in a consistent fashion for the purposes of identifying the preferred alternative. As you can possibly imagine, the human mind is simply incapable of executing such transactions at the level and magnitude required for complex decisions. To that extent, this model is unrealistic. However, due to the advent of sophisticated data storage, retrieval and processing machines, it is now possible to achieve economic rationality to some extent. Number 2. Bounded rationality model or administrative man model. An alternative model, one not bound by the previously studied assumptions, has been presented by Simon. This is the bounded rationality model, also known as the administrative man model. As the name implies, this model does not assume individual rationality in the decision process. Instead, it assumes that people, while they may seek the best solution, usually settle for much less because the decisions they confront typically demand greater information processing capabilities than they possess. They seek a kind of bounded for limited rationality in decisions. The concept of bounded rationality attempts to describe decision processes in terms of 3 mechanisms. Number 1. Sequential attention to alternative solutions. People examine possible solutions to a problem sequentially. Instead of identifying all possible solutions and selecting the best, as suggested in the econologic model, the various alternatives are identified and evaluated one at a time. If the first solution fails to work, it is discarded and the next solution is considered. When an acceptable, that is good enough and not necessarily the best solution is found, the search is discontinued. Number 2. Use of heuristics. A heuristic is a rule which guides the search for alternatives into areas that have a high probability for yielding satisfactory solutions. For instance, some companies continually select management graduates from certain institutions because in the past, such graduates have performed well for the company. According to the bounded rationality model, decision makers use heuristics to reduce large problems to manageable proportions so that decisions can be made rapidly. They look for obvious solutions or previous solutions that worked in similar situations. Satisfying. Whereas the econologic model focuses on the decision maker as an optimizer, this model sees him or her as a satisfier. An alternative is optimal if, number 1, there exists a set of criteria that permits all alternatives to be compared, and number 2, the alternative in question is preferred by these criteria to all other alternatives. An alternative is satisfactory if there exists a set of criteria that describes minimally satisfactory alternatives and the alternative in question meets or exceeds all these criteria. Based on these 3 assumptions about decision makers, it is possible to outline the decision process as seen from the standpoint of the bounded rationality model. This model consists of 8 steps. They are: number 1. Set the goal to be pursued or define the problem to be solved. Number 2. Establish an appropriate level of aspiration or criterion level. That is, when do you know that a solution is sufficiently positive to be acceptable even if it is not perfect? Number 3. Employ heuristics to narrow problem space to a single promising alternative. Number 4. If no feasible alternative is identified, then lower the aspiration level and begin the search for a new alternative solution. That is, repeat the second and the third step. Number 5. After identifying a feasible alternative, evaluate it to determine its acceptability. Number 6. If the identified alternative is unacceptable, initiate search for a new alternative solution. Number 7. If the identified alternative is acceptable, implement the solution. And number 8. Following implementation, evaluate the ease with which goal was or was not attained and raise or lower level of aspiration accordingly on future decisions of this type. As can be understood, this decision process is quite different from the econologic model. In it, we do not seek the best solution. Instead, we look for a solution that is acceptable. The search behavior is sequential in nature, that is, evaluating one or two solutions at a time. Finally, in contrast to the prescriptive econologic model, it is claimed that the bounded rationality model is descriptive. That is, it describes how decision makers actually arrive at the identification of solutions to organizational problems. Number 3. Implicit favorite model or gamesman model. This model deals primarily with non-programmed decisions. You will recall that non-programmed decisions are decisions that are novel or unstructured, like seeking one's first job. Programmed decisions, in contrast, are more routine or repetitious in nature, like the procedures for admitting students to a secondary school. The implicit favorite model developed by Soilberg in 1999 emerged when he observed the job choice process of graduating business students and noted that in many cases the students identified implicit favorites very early in the recruiting and choice process. However, they continued their search for additional alternatives and quickly selected the best alternative candidate, known as the confirmation candidate. Next, the students attempted to develop decision rules that demonstrated unequivocally that the implicit favorite was superior to the alternative confirmation candidate. This was done through perceptual distortion of information about the two alternatives and through weighing systems designed to highlight the positive features of the implicit favorite. Finally, after a decision rule was derived that clearly favored the implicit favorite, the decision was announced. Ironically, Soilberg noted that the implicit favorite was typically superior to the confirmation candidate on only two dimensions. Even so, the decision makers generally characterize their decision rules as being multidimensional in nature. The entire process is designed to justify to the individual, through the guise of scientific rigor, a non-programmed decision that has already been made in intuitive fashion. By doing so, the individual becomes convinced that he or she is acting in a rational fashion and making a logical, reasoned decision on an important topic.
You were listening to the audiobook by the School of Management Studies, IGNOU, for MBA program. Course code MMPC-001, Management Functions and Organizational Processes. Course Coordinator, Professor Srilata, School of Management Studies, IGNOU. Voice over by Harpreet Kaur. Edited by Tarannum Jahan. Program assisted by Jagbandhu Jana. Program produced by Manoj Kumar Singh. This program was brought to you by Electronic Media Production Center of Indira Gandhi National Open University.